everyone, and welcome to our talk today on There and Back Again, a history of the horse in America. I'm Dr. Jenifer Nadeau, and I will be your host today. I am going to say hello quickly. Hello, nice to meet you. And without further ado, we'll get right into our talk. Okay, so today we're going to talk about some different types of evolution of the horse, the scientific classification of the horse, their evolutionary forms, domestication, horses today, and answer any questions you may have. So first of all, evolution is a gradual process in which something changes into a different, and usually a more complex or better form. And this is a change also in the genetic composition of a population during successive generations. We're going to be talking more about this in just a minute. So there are really three mechanisms of evolution. And first of all, there's genetic drift. And genetic drift is when these changes happen just due to pure chance. Mutation is when there's a permanent change in the DNA sequence of a gene. And natural selection is when a horse has had particular reproductive or adaptive successes, like it can run faster than others, that makes it successful, that then allows that gene to carry on. That horse then breeds more and is able to carry on that gene in the population. So horses are really a classic example of evolution. We've seen enormous changes in the size and structure of the horse in the response to environmental changes. And the fossil remains of the horse have been well preserved. And we can see that in those river valley clays, sands, and sandstones that we find in the rich paleontologic beds of the American West. So when we look at the scientific classification of the horse, we start out just the same. We're both in kingdom Animalia. We're both in the phylum Chordata, meaning we have a vertebrae. And we are both in the class Mammalia. But here we differ. They're in the order Perissodactyla, which means that they have an odd number of toes. And then they're also in the same family of Perissodactyla with like rhinos. And then they're in family Equidae and the genus Equus, which is our magazine that many of us might like to read. And then our species is Cabalus. So the earliest ancestors of the horse appeared over 50 million years ago. And if we look on this little timeline, we can see that our little friend Eohippus started us off. And we're going to be talking about all these different evolutionary forms of the horse, as we said earlier. So looking at our timeline here, one thing you can see is that dinosaurs were already extinct before the first horses. So don't let your horse fool you that he's scared that that bird is a pterodactyl. Really, dinosaurs were extinct, so horses have no long-term memory of dinosaurs. They never were around together. And then the grasslands emerged. We had the first large predatory mammals come out, which helped make the horse run faster. And then humans came along, and woolly mammoths were there, the pyramids of Egypt. The last woolly mammoths died out, and then we're at the present day. So this is another example of our little timeline here. And then if you look at this, this is really a more realistic, although still much simplified picture of the evolution of the horse. It really isn't a straight line progress that we're going to look at. So this is really showing you, these were the grazing horses. These are the browsing horses that started us off in the early Eocene. If we orient you, here's the beginning horses and then what we have today. So looking at this is a more linear, but that's really not exactly how it happened. There are different forms together at the same time. So we start off with our early Eocene, and we have our Eohippus. You'll also hear it called Hyracotherium, or the dawn horse. This horse was only about 10 to 20 inches. This little picture says 8 inches tall at the shoulder. It had a short mane, and it had a long head with 44 teeth, 4 hoof toes on the front feet and 3 hoof toes on the hind feet. It also had an arched back, which would have made it interesting for riding. It had a short neck and legs and a long tail, and it did originate in North America. And this first horse was about the size of a fox. It was 3 hands. It had a short neck. It had long hind limbs, and again, an arched flexible backbone. And we already said that. Its teeth were suitable for browsing leaves from bushes, and it carried its weight on a central pad just like a dog does. Then we came to our next form, which is 37 to 32 million years ago in the Oligocene, and that is Mesohippus. Mesohippus was 24 inches high, so much taller. Its back was less arched, and its legs, neck, and face became longer. It had 3 toes on all of its feet, and its feet were padded, and the middle hoof was noticeably larger than the other 2. The next form we came to was Mesohippus, which was 37 to 32 million years ago in the Oligocene, and it had low crown teeth without cement because it could graze on the prairie. And it also needed to have greater speed, endurance for finding forage, water, protection, and survival because those grasslands opened up. Then we come into Mesohippus. This was about 17 million years ago in the Miocene. And this one was 10 hands high. We use a hand, 4 inches in a hand, and it had a longer muzzle and its jaw was deeper, and it had high crown cheek teeth with cement now, and its eye socket position changed so it could better observe predators, and it migrated to the steppes, and this caused changes to its body and diet. Like I say, it was like 10 hands tall. It used only its central toe, and its teeth were adapted for the hard grasses of the steppes, and again the eye socket position changed. And it had a larger brain. It was smarter. It was more agile. It had more of the look of a horse. And this horse actually gave way to at least 19 new grazing horse species, which is what we call Mesohippine radiation. And the 3 major groups that came out of this were the Hipparians, the Protohippines, and then the true equines. And this gave rise to the first burst of diversity in the horse family. Then we had Pliohippus, which was 10 million years ago. And Pliohippus's body was equipped for savanna-type conditions and had higher crown molars that developed for grinding grasses. It was the first single-hoofed equine where there were really no recognizable side toes, so that was the first single-hoofed equine. And it was 12 hands tall, and its skeletal structure let Pliohippus graze freely, roam the plains, and run swiftly from enemies. And we called this the grandfather of the horse. It had 1 toe on its front and hind legs, and splints of its 2nd and 4th digits. And it also, as we said, was the grandfather of the modern horse and evolved into Plesippus. Then there was a volcanic eruption, and it actually killed most of the horses in North America. This is actually seen from Iceland. But Plesippus survived this. This was 3.5 million years ago in the late Pliocene, and this was one of the first true Equus, around 14.2 hands. Some made it to the land bridge 2.5 million years ago, and this was a time at which Equus migrated from North America throughout the world via the Bering Strait. And there were over 50 species of the Equidae family at this time. And then Equus came up to 17 hands high, classic horse body, rigid spine, long neck, leg, and muzzle, and had fused leg bones with no rotation, splints of the 2nd and 4th digits, and it was found all over Asia, Africa, Europe, and North America. Its teeth are high crowned, straight line with cement for its modern grazing, and it developed into the modern day horse after 15 million generations. That got left out. And so we can see, looking at this, the evolutionary changes that the horse went through. Increase in body size, reduction in toe number, going to that single hoof, increase in the size of the cheek teeth, and a longer face. So I don't know if you've heard the joke, but bartender walks into a bar. Bartender says, "Why the long face?" Now you know. So looking at this, we can see here's our friend Eohippus skull down on the bottom to the present day Equus. Here are the 4 toes on the forefoot of Eohippus going to the 1 toe of Equus. Here's the 3 toes on the hind foot going to the 1 toe on the hind foot of Equus. And here's our short crown teeth without cement up through Mesohippus, and then we go to long crown cement covered teeth. And the premolar teeth become more and more like molars. And as we said, during the Ice Age, Equus migrated from North America throughout the world over the existing land bridges, and we found fossils in Asia, Europe, and Africa. So while Equus thrived in the Eastern Hemisphere, the horses slowly faded out of the Western Hemisphere, and the appearance of man in the Paleolithic period closely coincides with the disappearance of the horse, and the horse did not return to the continent of North America until the Age of Exploration. So where did they all go? Was it the glacial cold that set them away? Was it the insects, the disease, the acts of man, and starvation? But we don't really know. Several other mammals became extinct as well during this period, and that included the rhinoceros, the camels, the saber-toothed tigers, the elephants, and the mastodon. So we wind up with 7 subspecies that contributed to the ancestry of today's horse, according to Deb Bennett, who's a historian in this area. So first of all, we have the warm blood species, the giraffe subspecies, the oriental subspecies, which gave rise to the Arabians, and the tarpian. The Przewalski, that's actually how you pronounce that, Lamut, which is in Siberia, and the American glacial. So if you look at these, you can see their distribution. The Equus giraffe subspecies, Equus caballus, is in blue here. And you can see where that's found. The warm blood species is in pink. You could see the Pompelli is the Afro-Turkic subspecies, which is like the Arabians and those sorts. And then we have the Tarpian subspecies, which is Equus caballus ferus. That's a wild horse. The Przewalski is in purple here, is actually making a comeback right now in the wild. They released them again in the wild. We have the Lamut here, and then we have the glacial subspecies. So if you look at this, this shows you that actually standardbred trotters and pacers have a greater difference from each other than many distinct breeds like Arabians and quarter horses. A one would be closer genetic similarity. So you can see Arabians and quarter horses are more closely related than pacers and trotters, which is kind of interesting. Looking at initial human contact with horses, now that we're shifting into our domestication part, horses were originally an object of prey for humans. And it was thought at first that they drove them to their death over cliffs, but some people think that perhaps they corralled them and starved them to death, but that would have taken a while, so I'm not sure about that. One of the things we know is that they were found in a lot of cave paintings. And one of the great movies about that is Cave of Forgotten Dreams by Werner Herzog. It takes you to a cave, Chauvet Cave, and shows you the cave paintings of horses, which are really amazing. So if you get a chance to check that out. So then actual domestication happened around 4000 to 3000 BC on the steppes north of the Black Sea. And the first domesticated horses were closest to today's Exmoor ponies, the Przewalski horse, and the Caspian horse. The Caspian ponies, they really didn't look like the horses of today. And by the early third millennium, asses and onagers were harnessed, and donkeys were domesticated around 3400 BC. Like we said, tarpians were the first horse to be domesticated in southern Russia. And then the knowledge of how to capture and tame these wild horses spread throughout the world, and groups developed and domesticated the wild horses nearest them. And as we know, there are some groups of wild horses that still remain today, even in the US. And by 1000 BC, the domestication of the horse spread to almost every part of Europe, Asia, and North Africa. The Hittite Empire developed the first breed of horse in 1500. A breed has like distinct characteristics, and that's what makes it a breed. They crossed Tarpians with Proto-Orientals roaming the valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and they created a tough fleet breed that was suitable for chariot warfare. But this empire fell about 400 years later, and then the horses dispersed throughout the region and bred with other regional wild horses. In 1100 BC, the Ionian Greeks built livestock boats, and they transported their horses to their ports along the North African coast. And there's evidence that these Proto-Oriental horses were also shipped to Turkey, Syria, Iraq, North Africa, Italy, southern France, and Spain. From Spain, horses were shipped to Austria and to Galatia along the Iberian Peninsula. And here, horses were crossed with draft mares that were native to the area, and that established the Astrakhan breed. And Phoenician boats brought horses to Brittany, Cornwall, Wales, and Connemara, and these horses were traded for copper and tin. Crossbreeding was successful and became more popular. There were wild herds of proto-draft native to the area, and these became rare. So Oriental draft crossbreeds became the characteristic breeds of the peninsular Europe and the British Isles, which included the Welsh Mountain Pony, the Connemara, and Brittany ponies. In 711 AD, Spain was invaded by North African Arabs, and they brought with them Oriental breeds, and these Barbary horses were crossed with existing Spanish and Portuguese herds, and these horses were then shipped to England and France. And during the Middle Ages, horses were bred to amble, trot, and canter. In fact, you can find that in some books of the time. Old Iberian Ambler developed into the Genet, and the Old England and Ireland Amblers became the Palfrey, Galway, and the Hobby horse. Importation of the Assel, or purebred Arabian, to Western Europe actually marked the last major phase of horse breeding, and this crossbred resulted in the creation of the thoroughbred. And the thoroughbred has influenced almost every other breed in existence. So the thoroughbreds were crossed with the Spanish Genet, and they produced Andalusians, Lusitanos, and Alta Reals, and they were crossed with the Hobby, producing Morgans, Standardbreds, Saddlebreds, Tennessee Walking Horses, and Missouri Foxtrotters. And the quarter horse originated in Virginia from these bloodlines as well. It didn't achieve its modern appearance until after the Civil War, when it was crossed with the Mustang. The warm blood in Central Europe was least affected by crossbreeding, so pure Tarpans can be found in Poland. The karst horse is a near pure warm blood strain that's native to Hungary, and the last wild herds became extinct in Europe in 1903. And by 1947, they were extinct in Asia as well. As we know, some wild horses still exist in America. Then let's look a little bit at use and tack development. So the people first used a yoke to drive, kind of like what they use for oxen. And that was how they taught horses to drive. And then the first bits were actually made of twisted rawhide. They didn't have metal at the time. And then around 3000 to 2000 BC, metal bits anyway, around 3000 to 2000 BC in the Near East, the light chariot was developed for war and hunting. And that was the main way that they conducted war and hunted. And metal bits were then used in 1500 BC, and war chariots came to China around 1450 to 1050 BC. The saddle was not invented until 800 BC, so if people rode before then, they did it bareback. Polo was invented in Persia in the 6th century BC. It's the oldest equestrian game. And 460 to 377 BC was when Hippocrates first talked about the medical benefits of horsemanship, leading to therapeutic riding today. Therapeutic horsemanship. Initially, horses were ridden only by grooms and messengers, but then around 1000 BC, military mounts were ridden, and then the stirrup was invented about 200 to 300 AD, much later than the saddle, and the Roman army changed to cavalry until the fall of the Roman Empire around AD 476. And if we watch Outlander, we know that the Middle Ages used horses for battle, hunting, and agricultural work, and they rode them for that, as you see at the bottom picture. Looking at the refinement of horsemanship, the Renaissance was really a great period in which the anatomy of the horse was studied. The horse in art, the horse looked more like a horse in art. Training of horses was identified as an art, dressage, and horses were used to transport goods and people. And at this time, the Hungarians were considered supreme in carriage making. So now I'm going to talk to you a little about the Habsburg reign in Austria. We had the most notable of these was Maximilian II, who founded the Spanish riding school. He was the younger brother of Anne of Bohemia. Also, if we look further down, we'll see Francis Joseph I, who his wife Cece was a great equestrian. And there's some great books about her if you're interested in reading that. So here's some pictures of the Spanish riding school in Vienna, Austria. They do the airs above the ground with their horses. So this is a form of what they call high school. So it's very refined dressage. And this is what the interior of it looks like. This is the largest hot walker in the world that they have there for their horses to be exercised. The horses live right in the city during the time of their performances, and then they go out into the country and get a little rest. So this is the horse crossing the road. And then here is the Imperial Carriage Museum in Schönbrunn Palace, and this has the carriages that Sissi and Ferdinand used. So these are their carriages, very elaborate. And you can see the trappings of the horses. Down below you see a sled. You see a couple sleds actually on the right. This is Sissi, who rode. She was really into riding, loved horses. She had a side saddle. That's her hearse. Unfortunately, she was later killed by a crazy person who was after her husband. And then we come back to the horses' return to North America. So around 1519, Coronado brought 150 horsemen and their horses. Someone asked me that once. Yes, the horses were with them, back to America. And that's how horses first returned to North America. In 1539, De Soto brought 237 horses. And then de Mendoza in 1547 was the first governor of Mexico, or what it was called then was New Spain, and he had 1,500 horses. So he was a very wealthy man. Wealth could be measured in horses, so of course he was tremendously wealthy. In the 1600s, Spanish missions had a large number of livestock, including horses. And in the 1600s, ponies were also used in mining, like our little Shetland friends. So Spanish missions, Juan Dionate established a large settlement in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and he and other missionaries exposed Native American children to breaking, training, and using horses. So from 1650 to 1750, Spanish horses were dispersed over the plains, and among the Native Americans, a great horse culture developed, and within 200 years, the great wild horse herds adapted to the region. The profound effect that the horse had on the lifestyle and culture of the Plains Indians in a relatively short period resulted in a population and cultural explosion that enabled the Native Americans to effectively slow the European colonization of the West. It didn't last too long, though, unfortunately for them. And then settlers on the East Coast are responsible for developing many American breeds. East Coast Native Americans had different needs for horses than the Plain Indians because they were primarily farmers and trappers, and they used horses as pack animals, and also the horses didn't have as great of a cultural influence. Chickasaw horse was a Spanish breed that came over with Franciscan missionaries, and they eventually led to the development of the quarter horse, the American saddle horse, and the Tennessee walking horse. The English brought horses to Virginia, the Dutch brought horses to New York, and the French brought horses to Quebec. And breeding farms were also established in the West Indies during the time of the colonies, and most colonists got horses from the Indies, not from Europe. The problem with horses in New England was that small, hilly, rocky fields were better suited to oxen than draft horses, and Puritan ethics were against the frivolity of having riding horses. Horse racing had a negative association with the English gentry who had persecuted the Puritans, so the Puritans did not agree with having horses. So horses really weren't very common initially in New England. But New York and Pennsylvania developed heavy horses that could till the soil and haul products to market in a big city. And light Spanish horse mares were crossed with draft breed stallions like Belgians, Percherons, Shires, and Clydesdales. They were never successful in developing a draft or coach breed. The incredibly popular Conestoga horse breed was created. It helped to pull wagons and take people across to the West. But no official registry was ever created, so the breed disappeared as Old World imports decreased. In early American history, during the Revolutionary War, the light dragoons used horses, and in the late 1800s, horses were really central to urban life. People used them to get around. The exploration of frontier land really increased demand. There was also an increased demand for mules during this time. And in 1820 to 1870, there was a demand for heavy horses. In the 1850s, horses were used for urban fire protection. In the top picture there, you can see horses running to a fire. They would have the equipment for the horses, the harness to get into, suspended from the ceiling, and it would drop down when there was a fire, and the horses would get into it. In 1855, the 1st and 2nd Cavalry were formed, and in the 1800, horses were used for mass transit and local transportation. In 1862 was the Morrill Land Grant Act, which established places like the University of Connecticut, land grant universities to teach farmers how to be more successful at farming and agriculture. In 1898, in the Spanish-American War, the Rough Riders rode horses, and World War I in England was when horses started to be used for therapy. And World War I was really, though, the twilight of the cavalry and the horse and war. After that, in the early 1900s, there was a transition from horsepower to gasoline engine power, so horses were no longer needed as much. They're still used in the horse-drawn hearse for dignitaries and presidents. There was actually one recently. They've been used for mounted police. George Floyd had a horse-drawn hearse was what I was alluded to. They were used for mounted police as well, and the market for heavy horses in agriculture went into decline after World War I because, like we said, they weren't being used as much. And in the 1950s, British physiotherapists began using therapeutic riding. So an increase in personal income and free time has resulted in the unprecedented popularity of the riding and driving horse as a sport and recreational animal. So today there are approximately 7.2 to 10 million horses in America. And there's very popular different disciplines, horse showing, dressage. You can see down here fox hunting. I actually have a fox hound. You can see up there that's a horse show where they're doing some jumping there. That's a hunt class, actually. And then rodeos, cutting, polo, combined training, and driving. You can see on the top picture, that's a gymkhana. Also, people do endurance riding. They do therapeutic riding and driving. They do packing, trail riding. That's me and my boyfriend on a trail ride there. A dude ranch, and summer camp, holiday on horseback. And there's many movies and TV that popularized the horse. Actually, the first motion picture started in 1878 when Edward Muybridge photographed a horse named Accident, and he took successive pictures, and then he saw that when he flipped through them, it looked like the horse was moving. And then you see the bottom picture, that's Man from Snowy River. We have Flicka, Mr. Ed, Black Stallion, Black Beauty, Hidalgo, Spirit, Secretariat, War Horse. So many. You can see my Facebook talk about some horse movies to watch if you get a chance. It's on the UConn Extension website. And these are my sources. Does anyone have any questions? All right, thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed learning about this, and I hope you have a safe and wonderful time with your horses. Keep on horsing around.